And we're live. What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining. What a week. What a week, huh? I haven't streamed since last week, since before Charlie was assassinated. And feels like we're living in a whole different world right now. And yeah, we're still in the few days after. Things very well will calm down, but this has really had created global waves. There's memorials all throughout the world for Charlie. I think many are surprised by how loved of a figure he was globally. Now I have we're going to go through different things, the different narratives, what people are saying, the conspiracies as to who killed him and what the motives may have been, who's more violent, the left or the right. We'll do some Q&A. Maybe we'll have some callers hop on. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. Maybe before getting into the who killed him, just some reflections on what we're seeing. So, it goes without saying, murdering people for their views and rhetoric is wrong. It's indefensible. But many people are cheering this on. And it reflects a problem in society. And I'm not sure this is new. I don't know if this is a new problem or if social media just makes it more noticeable that when somebody praises death or cheers on death, it gets shared far and wide. So it's very loud, right? These celebrations are loud, but what percentage of total people do those cheering death represent? It could be a tiny fraction, and it would be very hard to tell because of social media. So that's something worth keeping in mind. What we can say, and thankfully so, is the entire left-wing establishment, from politicians to the media, strongly condemned this. There was no question. Maybe I think there's probably one article I saw from a mainstream publication that has some questionable framing, but by and large, and also some anchor on MSNBC kind of was blaming Charlie for his rhetoric. So there were some small signs, but overwhelmingly the establishment condemned this, and rightfully so. But many people cheered it on. And again, we don't know how fringe these people are. Now, the right is making it seem like this is a left-wing issue. Look at the left. Look how violent they are. This is being capitalized on by people like Trump and Elon Musk, who are disgraceful using something this horrible to just further divide society, to fuel the division and radicalization in society. Really shameful how two of the most powerful people in the world are leveraging this Charlie's death. Now, the reason it's unclear if we could call this a left-wing issue, I think it's just a human issue, is because right-wingers, some number of them, also cheer on deaths when it's a political opponent of theirs. This is not unique to the left. During the George Floyd protests and riots, there was a trend called George Floyd Challenge, where it was a bunch of people reenacting the scene with the knee on the back, right? So that was just a disgusting form of mockery. So this does exist very clearly on both sides, and it's unclear if one side does it to a greater extent than the other. It's very hard to measure. What we do know is that in terms of right-wing domestic terrorism compared to left-wing domestic terrorism, right-wing domestic terrorism is more prevalent. For decades now, consistently, it's been more prevalent. So this whole painting that the left is violent, yeah, there's violence on the left that needs to be addressed and dealt with, but there's no data supporting that it is a problem exclusive to the left or even worse on the left. Now, when it comes to addressing this, first of all, I think there's been a pretty good job from our institutions to widely condemn this. But I think something that we can change in discourse, which I think might help mitigate left-wing violence and cheering on violence against right-wingers, is how the left is very quick to call people they disagree with a Nazi or a fascist. Because violence against Nazis and fascists is much easier to justify, right? If someone's a Nazi, is it that wrong to attack them? So part of mitigating further violence from the left is to stop with this rhetoric, calling those you disagree with a Nazi or a fascist. But it's not a left-wing issue. It exists on both sides. It's really a human issue, and the ease in which we can believe that harming someone else is justified. And rest assured, if a prominent left-wing public figure, politician is killed, people will be cheering it on, and then the excuse will be, well, they did it for Charlie, therefore we can. So anybody who, right, you could already foresee that being an excuse, but anybody who is so unprincipled that that will be their justification for cheering on death likely would have done it anyways. If you feel that death should not be cheered on, which I think is a good principle, then it shouldn't matter if other people are doing it or not. That's that. What else on the topic? Hold on, we have a visitor. Come, okay. Welcome, Peach. Let's get into the assassination, the who is behind it. I think I have some more thoughts, but it'll probably come later. So let's get into the difference between being a conspiracy theorist and a conspiracy realist, right? So for those who have been watching this channel for a while, or who follow me on Twitter, know that after the Bibas family were killed and Israel said they were killed with their bare hands, I put out an analysis making the case that they were almost certainly killed by an IDF airstrike. And I think that theory over time has only become more certain because no third party, not even Israeli forensics, has ever publicly confirmed the claim made by Netanyahu and Hagari. So I certainly am capable of accusing Israel of some form of conspiracy and even putting my neck and reputation on the line claiming so. Yet, there's really no reason to believe that the Mossad was behind Charlie Kirk's killing. There just isn't. And this is the difference between being a conspiracy realist and a conspiracy theorist. Some conspiracies exist. Governments are capable of lying. That's true. But that doesn't mean that every time something bad happens, it's Israel, which is many people's go-to, right? Those claiming it's Israel were not convinced by evidence. They looked for evidence to try to make the case that it was Israel. They're working backwards. When you want to try to understand who is behind or who's responsible for something, you first need to start by thinking of all the possible options. I'm going to use Bibas as a reference point to show the difference between this and the Bibas family, right? So all the options of who could have killed Charlie. I mean, he was a very polarizing individual. He was hated by the far right groypers. He was hated by the trans community and by others in the left and by the Muslim community. So, and we see the number of people cheering on his death. There's millions of people who are happy that he was killed. Any one of them could have taken up arms against him. Or, so that's one theory, one of the hundreds of thousands or millions of people who might have decided they're going to do something about it. Or it was the Mossad or some other intelligence agency. But just based on that alone, there's a lot more. Just the fact that you have hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people who want someone dead, Unless you have evidence to suggest that, like strong evidence to suggest that it's some intelligence unit or some government, the most plausible explanation is that he was assassinated by one of the people that hated him. That by default is going to be the most plausible. How does this compare to the Bibas analysis? Well, Bibas family were killed. There's a small range of options of what it could have been. It could have been an airstrike. It could have been killed by their captors. It could have been maybe neglect, right? Maybe their captors were killed in an airstrike and they were locked in the room and no one was able to access them, so they died of dehydration, right? But a very limited number of things that could have been. And then you try to collect evidence to see which of these is the most plausible. And then when you look at the evidence, I'm not going to do a deep dive into the Bibas analysis. I have one on YouTube. I have one on Twitter. You could check it out. But when you look at the different possibilities and then look at the evidence that supports each possibility, for that, it's very clear that airstrike is by far the most plausible. And it doesn't require all too much for Israel to say that. It doesn't require mass coordination amongst many different departments. Just a small handful of people need to agree to just not be honest about what happened, which is also important when understanding conspiracies. How many people need to be involved? Because if it's a lot of people, for A, it's very hard to coordinate between that many people. B, you're likely to have a whistleblower. And we have Israeli whistleblowers all the time. Now, this really isn't the MO of the Mossad. The Mossad they do assassinations, but generally against people they deem as security threats, militants, leaders of militant groups. They've done this all over the Middle East. But the MO of killing a political commentator who is very pro-Israel because they're concerned that one day they might not be pro-Israel. And then they need to convince many people that this is a good idea, many people within the unit. They need to convince many people within the unit to kill an innocent person who's pro-Israel for fear of what might happen one day. The thought to get buy-in for many members of the unit and none of them will leak it, that is also very implausible. So it's not their MO. The Mossad, as much as they're capable of assassinations, there's a difference between assassinating a leader in Qatar or a leader in Hamas leader in Iran and killing a pro-Israel commentator because of a future concern. These are just very different things. These are worlds apart. There's no reason to actually believe this to be true. And let's really talk about the motive, right? So that's the motive. They say, well, we heard that Charlie might be scared of Israel, and we started to see him maybe potentially shifting. Okay, you could find a motive for anybody. If you try hard enough, there's always a motive. Let's say Nick Fuentes was assassinated. Well, that's obvious. Okay, they wanted to silence an anti-Zionist, anti-Semite. Makes sense. But let's say it was Ben Shapiro, right? Ben Shapiro is the most loyal American conservative to Israel, or the most loyal prominent one. They could have said, oh, they're just trying to do this to garner global sympathy for the Jews and to convince more Jews to move to Israel and to distract people from what's happening in Gaza. No matter what, you could always have a motive. And you could find a motive for any government as well. Maybe Trump called this assassination because Trump wanted to be able to pass authoritarian laws. He wanted to blame it on the left, right? He wanted to stir up division and paint his political opponents as violent and extreme. Or maybe it was China, right? Maybe China did it because they're trying to create a civil war. This increases the chance of civil war. China and Russia, they have great interest in there being civil war in the United States. So there's a motive for them. So you could always construct a motive no matter who it is, no matter which government we're talking about. So you can't work backwards from the answer you want, right? That's not an analysis. That's not how you conduct an analysis. That's not how you get to truth. That's just how you can confirm your belief. And we're seeing this online in mass. The evidence is so weak. And people are convinced. And again, I don't know how much percent to put this at, but at least online, hundreds of thousands of people are convinced that this was Mossad with no evidence, with flimsy motive. That's all you have. So between the unprincipled stance on both sides and our easiness to justify violence and how conspiracy minded and batshit crazy people are, it seems like we have a lot of problems in society. What's the solution? We need some kind of technology that can actually make us much better critical thinkers, I think. It's like reduce our proclivity to violence and increase our capacity for rational thought and compassion. That as much as I think there could be a solution that comes to with education and just better systems and institutions, it very well may be a technological solution, might be the surest way to get us to that point. Whether it's I don't know, gene editing or some therapy you do. They have these like ways that electromagnetic pulses interact with your brain and affect the chemistry. It's certainly not good enough to achieve just that, but I don't see how you fix this, right? It's such a deep problem. And again, I say I don't see how we fix it. There's definitely a solution in education and just a better political system and a better culture. Um, that's just that's something we need to be working towards. When I say a technological solution, that's me being lazy and looking for the easy way out. And just because technology is moving so fast, it very well may be the surest way to get there. But we can't just wait for that solution to come along. We do need to try to construct institutions that help people think better. In short, people just need to think better. You know what? Okay, well, let's do some Q&A. Anything else I wanted to... I feel bad. I was meant to do this on Discord. I forgot to do it on Discord. Whatever, next time. Okay, we got a lot of questions coming in. Super chats will be prioritized. Those who want to support the show. Oh, and then a lot of people say, so guys, feel free to throw evidence at me that make you feel compelled that it's Israel or something that seems sketchy, and we could review it together. But one of the things is people are saying, oh, Netanyahu, why is he going on air and saying it's not Israel? Why is he politicizing this? He's an opportunist piece of shit. Like, why would he not want to politicize this? And it is true that him coming on air saying we're being accused of assassinating him, that's more suspicious. It was tactically dumb for him to do that. But him coming on air to opportunistically make this seem like it's a left-wing Islamic alliance, that's just him. That's just the type of person he is. That's not really proof of anything. Mm-hmm. Shervin says he did condemn Israel's actions, calling it ethnic cleansing. Yeah, Charlie has had some condemnation of Israel, but he is one of the most pro-Israel right-wing, or was one of the most pro-Israel political commentators in the world. People pulled up a clip here, a clip there, but he was overwhelmingly pro-Israel. And good to see you here, Shervin. Also, another thing that I think we should be concerned about. So it seems, right, that the shooter, Tyler Robinson, was politically motivated. He was left wing. But I'm seeing conflicting reports. But let's say it were to be discovered that Tyler Robinson is in fact a right winger, maybe Groyper adjacent. Do we trust Kash Patel and Trump administration to be fully transparent about that. That's another interesting thing because even we've seen there's like been an attempt to put it on blame the trans community. Whether they first said there was a bullet casing with some trans writing on it, which that ended up being bullshit, and then they're trying to say he was dating a trans person, which I think that's confirmed now. But even that doesn't. He's still a, he's not trans. It's like blaming the Jews for everything is what they're trying to do now with trans. We see it happen. Some segments of the right are politicizing this to make it seem like it's a trans issue. Others are making it seem like it's a Jew issue. But you could always frame and blame those who you want to. Brad saying Israel exploded the microphone under his shirt like a mini cannon. Remember the pagers for Hamas? Yeah, Brad, I don't know about that. Why? Why would they do that? And also, that wasn't an explosion under his shirt would have looked very different. Very different. So, Obscurant says, didn't the Gray Zone article claim he turned the financial support from Israel and free a troop to Israel? Yeah, that you don't get killed for that. Like we need to think about the chain of commands. It's not so simple. So Netanyahu calls the head of Mossad. He's like, okay, we're going to kill Charlie Kirk because he didn't take our funding. And then that Mossad agent, the head of Mossad, needs to give that to other people in the Mossad. Say, we are now going to kill one of the most pro-Israel American commentators because he refused to take Israeli money. And then everyone agrees to it, and there's no whistleblowers. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. Not even a little bit. Yeah, it's true. Tyler Robinson has not confessed yet, so he should be presumed innocent until proven otherwise. And I would like to see the evidence why they're certain that it's him. Brad says, so Israel will shoot little kids and commit a genocide but not kill Charlie. Yeah, well, so again, you need to even there, look at all the whistleblowers we have. You're not getting a single whistleblower, and I talk about this all the time. You're not going to get a single whistleblower saying, I was told to intentionally shoot children. It's the lowering of protection of civilians to such an extent where soldiers do whatever they want, and some of them are recklessly shooting even children. That's not a command from above to shoot children, and if it was, eventually we would hear about it. So yeah, if you're saying that Israel is commanding from above to intentionally shoot children, then that's equally as implausible. The war crimes in Gaza, you don't need to instruct them to harm civilians. All you need to do is instruct them to reduce protections for civilians. If you reduce protections enough, it becomes indistinguishable from harming them intentionally. And that's the way you do it, by reducing protections, because that you justify we're reducing protections in order to protect ourselves and have an advantage in trying to fight Hamas. So that's how you do it without getting if there's any whistleblower, and we've had a lot of whistleblowers, they all say the same thing. It was never a malicious command to kill civilians. It was just there's a no-go zone, and we're taught to be suspicious and shoot anybody there. Or we saw suspicious activity in a building, so we blew it up. We thought it might be Hamas, right? You lower protections, it allows you to mass kill civilians without needing to give any command. And very different. David Pendre says, if Tyler did do it and he's elected, is it fair to say the left killed Charlie? No, I don't think you can collectivize like that just because of the actions of one person, especially because the left is overwhelmingly against this. No. The person who should be blamed for killing Charlie is the person who killed Charlie, accomplices, if he had any accomplices, and then there's responsibility you could put on a security detail if we saw that there was some negligence. Brad says, so Mossad has never assassinated anyone. No, they do, but it's people who are very clearly who they can justify security threats, leaders of terror organizations, uh, members of foreign governments that are enemies. That's their MO, not pro-Israel commentators because they're scared that one day that commentator might turn on Israel. That's just not their MO. It's completely different from them killing people who are their enemy, right? Because that you get instant buy-in almost always, unless the mission doesn't make sense. I did see the other day that the Mossad didn't agree to carry out the attack in Doha, Qatar, and that's why they did an airstrike. And that's if that's true, that would be the first time in history I think something like that would have happened. But if you're calling in, if the call is okay, we now can take out a Hamas leader, everyone in the Mossad is going to be in on that unless it seems like too risky of an operation. There's no moral qualms about it. There's not going to be a whistleblower because Israel, it's just very obvious that that should be done. The second you're engaging in killing somebody pro-Israel who's innocent because you're scared that one day they might turn on Israel, that's just worlds apart from killing an adversary. Worlds apart. And you're almost certainly to not get full buy-in from the people carrying it out, and it's very likely to lead to somebody whistleblowing. Brad saying, "Are you Jewish? You look Jewish." Yeah, I am Jewish. Yeah, I'm Jewish by ethnicity, not by religious belief. But I imagine you could tell that as well by looking at me. Yeah, I said, yeah, Asdast. I can't even pronounce your name, whatever that's meant to mean. It's the quote by Harry something. He goes, I'm not going to name names, but I was told by someone close to Charlie that Charlie thinks Israel will kill him if he turns against them. So this is like a third degree quote. Harry is saying he heard this from somebody who heard this from Charlie. There needs to be, everybody there needs to be telling the truth. Everybody there needs to be interpreting what they heard correctly. And even if that's true, Charlie didn't turn on Israel. So that's, again, that the amount of evidence, the amount of weight that evidence carries is close to zero. See, Brad, you go, all you needed to know, thanks. No, you see, so you're acknowledging that you are, you reach conclusions based on somebody's identity. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I believe. Nothing. You could, if anybody who thinks they could reach a conclusion about an individual based on whatever ethnic group they come from will constantly be led to wrong conclusions in life, and it's a pretty miserable way to live. But in terms of my views relative to most Jews, I am pretty much an outlier in my community on many things. One is Israel-Palestine. I'm very much in the minority, and the other is my views on anti-Semitism would put me in the minority as well. But if you just judge someone based on what group they come from, you would assume that I'm of majority opinion. So you see how wrong you just were just by reaching a conclusion? It's almost like, let's say somebody got raped by someone named Brad. Oh, you're Brad. I know all I need to know. That's the level of that's the level of intelligence and consciousness that's going into your opinion. It's just dumb. There's nothing you could. Actually, let me expand on that. There's not nothing. If you had to guess, right? If you're in a situation where you're like, okay, here's a Jew that I've never met. What are their views on Israel? And you had to guess, okay, you could guess based on majority. Fair. But there's no reason to guess if you could just get to know somebody and then reach a conclusion based on their actual views. So Hubert says Brad is slower than most. Well, I think hateful people, it seems to be partially IQ related, but I don't think it's just intelligence. I think that we're pattern recognizing animals, and it's much easier for us to just like collectivize um, and create like simple heuristics for the world, right? So you could think of this from like a hunter gatherer perspective. That animal dangerous, that animal safe. This berry sweet, this berry poisonous. We had to just have these like clear black and white categories. It helped keep us alive, and now we do it in a very complex world, and we're often led to wrong conclusions uh, because that way of categorizing doesn't work with the complexity we have in the world. So I think intelligent people also fall victim to this simplistic way of seeing things. Oh, so GW, you say something that this was another point I wanted to make. Stop trying to make CK bigger than he was. He was killed by some hate he preached. So no, I don't agree. He was killed by some hate he preached. He was killed by somebody who decided to kill him. But if you're not convinced that murdering people with views you disagree with is wrong, and you should be convinced that it's wrong, but if you're not, at the very least, you shouldn't want to make a martyr and a hero of people with bad views, right? So Charlie is now cemented as a legend. His legacy will always be um, greater when you're killed in your prime, even if you die in your prime of natural causes, but being killed in your prime, you are cemented in history as a legend, as a hero. His views, him and his views will be more popular than ever before. So it's morally indefensible killing somebody like this, but it's also tactically self-defeating. Why would you want to do that? You even see people are putting him up with like photos next to Jesus and MLK and others who were killed for their views. Hubert says, I thought people using a stance on Second Amendment as a justification for his murder was really stupid. Yeah, I agree. That's stupid. You could point to the irony of it, but it's not an argument for why, Yellen says, what are your thoughts on Trump? Do you call Trump a fascist? So Trump can't be a fascist because he is the president in a democracy. So I think he's limited in his capacity to be a fascist, but I think he would like to be one, right? I think he has the psychological profile uh, of a fascist. He's just limited by a system of checks and balances. So maybe aspiring fascist would be the right way to put it, but I don't know if we could call him a fascist. Floodland comes with a different perspective. Say Trump is definitely not a fascist. We know this is because he had every opportunity to declare martial law during COVID and he didn't. But what would he have had to gain from that, though? Like he's a what you're saying, like to cancel elections or something? Because he's a fascist. Let's say he still wanted to win the other election. He's still driven by what's popular in his base, uh, popular to his base. So it's I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to make of the fact that he didn't declare martial law. I mean, he's extending the powers of the military. He blew up the boat of that alleged drug smuggling boat off the coast of Venezuela without due process. Now, there's conflicting reports if it was even drug smugglers, rounding up people and deporting them without due process. He seems to be wanting to consolidate power. He attacks the media to delegitimize those who critique him, which, there's a lot of legitimate critique of the media. It's just dangerous when it comes from the head of state. Rounding up people for anti-Semitism, I don't know. That's pretty problematic. Well, Yilin, what you're saying is what I said at the beginning, that one of the ways that we can mitigate left-wing violence is by not being quick to call people fascists and Nazis, because it helps justify harming them. So I don't support just flat out calling Trump a fascist or others a fascist. I think it's we could say these people have dangerous views, bad ideas. Let's challenge them. I think that's the way to do it. So Floodland saying he would have had total fascist-like power for a period of time. Yeah, but again, he still needs to go to elections. Would that have been a popular move? How would his base have supported that? So I just don't know how much weight to give that. I envy the chillness of your cat in these times. Yeah, Peach is pretty chill. That's Eckhart Tolle, the author of The Power of Now, and a few other books all about mindfulness and spirituality. In The Power of Now, one of his quotes is, I knew many Zen masters, most of them cats. So Mitznagani says Obama was a capitalist and imperialist, ergo a fascist too. Is that what a fascist means? Is that what it means to be a fascist? I don't know about that. Let's hop into Discord real quick as well. Okay. Okay, to all those joining on Discord, I kind of messed up because I've already been live for 38 minutes and I gave the rundown on Charlie Kirk, my thoughts on it, and the conspiracy that the Mossad was involved. And I'm not going to repeat all that because it'd be pretty boring for those who already listened to my thoughts. But I guess better late than never, and we'll bring some people on. Lyra, I see you have your hand raised, so I'm going to bring you on, but just know we are being live streamed, so whatever you say will be publicly heard. Okay, I've invited you on, Lyra. I'm not hearing you. Lyra? Hello? I mean, I'm hearing something, but not you. Hubert, why are you saying lira? Is that how it's pronounced? And how do you know? How do you know who I'm talking to? Are you also here on Discord? You can't talk. You just had oral surgery, but you knew Charlie. Oh, well, then why are you on stage? Well, then hop off stage. If you can't speak, how do you? But okay. Well, I'm sorry for your loss. Whoops! I just removed her from the room. Okay. If anybody else wants to hop on, you're welcome. Just raise your hand. We'll bring you on. Milo says it's not only about him, the legend now, but his amazing spiritual legacy. He was never about him, but always put Jesus above. How many people that didn't know him deeply felt a close friend died? Yeah, I mean, this was definitely hard for many people, even surprisingly so. Even the reaction in Israel to his death was surprising. So he seems to have impacted a lot more people than what many of us thought. Yeah. And yeah, if again, if you don't like somebody's views, you definitely shouldn't kill them because it's just the wrong thing to do. But also, why would you want to cement them as eternal legends by killing them? Right, which is why we were talking about this earlier. When it comes to conspiracies, you could always find a motive. Okay, you could say he was killed by his own people because they wanted to make a martyr out of him in order to spread his message. They felt like they were losing the culture war, and in having a legend be killed like that, then his legacy would spread. So you could always construct a motive. And yeah, for those on Discord, if you do want to, if you do want, you can watch the stream from the beginning when I did go over the whole conspiracy and thoughts about left-wing versus right-wing violence. Al says, wait, Al, did you delete that? Where did I see you? Am I hallucinating? It was auto-deleted. Oh, interesting. Because it seemed okay by the mod bot. You said Jews are always to be blamed. They're always scapegoated. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty consistent trend. But now it's also the trans community is also becoming a scapegoat, right? People are people are taking this opportunity to go, all out against the trans community. David says, will Bibi have a relatively luxurious time in jail if he's found guilty or as bad as anyone? Well, he's not going to go to court. He's not going to go to the ICC. So the chance of him actually getting arrested and tried is very, very low. But if that does happen, I don't think he's going to be in one of those prisons. He'll be in one of those white-collar prisons almost certainly. He's not going to be in a place with violent criminals. That's hard to imagine. But I don't think I think the chance of him being charged is very, very low. Unless his political opponents throw him under the bus, right? Imagine if, as more and more information comes out about what's happened in Gaza, and it's just a dark stain on Israel, which it will be. It certainly will be. And then Um, he's used as a scapegoat, right? They kind of turn him in and make it seem like Netanyahu is responsible for all these war crimes. Let's throw him under the bus. Maybe. I just don't think there's a high likelihood that happens. Oh, you mean jail for corruption? No, that will be like also a white collar prison. There's not going to be any of that. Yeah, he's not going to be there with the violent criminals. Also, Israeli prisons have a pretty high Arab population, like not Palestinian, like Palestinian citizens of Israel. They're not. He's not going to be in general public with them. No chance. Um, we could even see. I mean, we've had other prime ministers in prison, so we could probably get some data on what their conditions were. Bibi will be crowned king of Israel before he goes to jail. Both are unlikely, but you might be right. Flowland99 goes, I heard most families in Switzerland have rifles in home, yet much lower gun violence in the US. Why? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, yeah, the cat's real. Yeah. So Switzerland. Well, here's me about to take a right-wing position, which I feel pretty strongly about. The problem with mass shootings in the United States is more so a cultural issue and one of mental health. It's not just access to guns. Now, you could say because we have a mental health issue and because we have a lot of gang violence, making guns less accessible might help reduce gun violence. But data from places like Switzerland and even Israel, right? Israel's a heavily armed country. And we don't have this type of mass shootings. When there's a mass shooting in Israel, it's a terror attack. It's not by Israelis who own guns. So it's not the all these shootings in the U.S. is not just accessibility to guns, but when you have an unhealthy population with access to guns, it's a bad combination. Also, I think in Switzerland there's a lot of like regulation that the amount of ammo you could have, and someone should look into that, but it's not quite like the US, but it doesn't matter. Guns is not a problem in a healthy society. It's just not. Like right now, you have 30,000 gun deaths in the United States every year. 50% of those are suicide. Okay. Now, so that's 15,000 suicides from guns every year. What percent of those 15,000 would have done it anyways? That's an interesting question. I do think that having an access to gun increases the likelihood of suicide because it's just a very simple and clean way. Well, not clean in that sense. It's actually messy, but it's clean that you don't need to suffer. Like you don't need to hang yourself or anything like that. It's a pretty straightforward way to do it. And I think some people commit suicide impulsively. And the reason I say this is we actually, in the IDF, there's sometimes suicides that seem to be pretty impulsive. For example, this is when I was serving during a Mossad. Mossad are these very long walks you do. And you say, oh, just a walk, but the pace in which you walk and you're carrying some amount of weight, they're very, very hard. And you're walking for many, many hours at a time. They took a water break and some guy just took a step aside and killed himself. Right. That was very much, I'm suffering. I just want to get rid of the suffering. I'm going to do it. So you would almost certainly reduce the number of suicides if there wasn't so much access to guns. But I do imagine of the 15,000, the majority would still exist. Of the other 15,000, and I don't have the exact number for this, but overwhelmingly, it's gang violence. It's not these school shootings or political assassinations. That's less than 1% of these mass shootings. It's primarily between gangs. If you take away the suicide and you take away the gang violence, you don't actually have a gun problem in the United States. Or, I mean, you could say anytime a gun is used in a way it shouldn't be, it's a problem, but the numbers reduce significantly. I imagine they would reduce by something like 99% if you exclude suicide and gang violence. Now, suicide and gang violence are real things, but these gangs aren't using legally obtained guns, right? And suicides, I think it's fair to say most would exist regardless. So Shane is saying, in Switzerland, the gun legislation and training requirements are extremely strong. Most people have rifles due to military service, so often the ammo is not stored at home with the rifle. Okay, I recall hearing something like that. Cool. Simiki says, what about armed settlers and their violence? Well, so armed settlers, most of their violence is not with guns, actually. It's they're hitting people, you know. It's primarily not gun violence. Now, the fact that they are armed and Palestinians are generally unarmed allows for a very problematic power dynamic where it allows settlers to harass and abuse Palestinians with little fear of retribution. You don't need to use your gun. Just the fact that you have a gun allows you to act in a way that you otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable acting. In addition to that, knowing that the police and IDF is going to take your side over their side. So that's the problem with settlers being armed. Not that they're using them, but it allows them to do things with impunity. Hubert says the whole point of arms is so you don't end up under the boot of a fascist regime. Yeah, I mean, that is the purpose of the Second Amendment. It is worth acknowledging and discussing how relevant that even is today, right? So our government, because of technological advancements, has a monopoly on violence that guns on their own maybe can challenge to a little extent, but it's not like it was when the Constitution was written, because then we saw an armed militia is what defeated the British, right? That was an armed militia. There was very clear example of why the people should be armed. If not, we very well may still be under British rule, right? So that's what inspired it. But let's say right now you have the armed, whoever in America is armed, and many are armed, they take up arms against the government. Can they compete with drones and jet planes and tanks and RPGs? And, you know, I guess it's still better than being unarmed. But if the US wants to, you know, have you living under their boot, they still will be able to, most likely, just because of the disparity in force that both sides have. And this disparity will likely continue to grow over time. So I don't want to say the Second Amendment is obsolete, but it's has lost a lot of its protective power, you could say. You're saying it's even more relevant today. Well, more relevant maybe in theory, but in practice, if the government decides that they are going to do something, I mean, look, it's the threat of violence does. I'll give you an example. There was a situation where you had these like anarchists, these right-wing anarchists. Was this in like Wyoming or something? Maybe Washington, where they were having a standoff with the FBI on their ranch. And the FBI didn't just raid them and take it over because they were heavily armed, right? We saw a clear example of how, because they were armed, the FBI couldn't just move in on them. True. So we saw a clear example. But in a situation where if the government saw them as a big enough threat, well, they could just airstrike them to oblivion. They just blow up the ranch from above. Like there's nothing they could do if the government wanted to. So it does do something, but if the goal of the government is really to become a fascist government and to control the people, I don't know if the armed population can really do all too much about it. And if they can now, will they still be able to in 10 years when you have AI weaponry and drones and you're not even going to be fighting humans anymore? So Jack Kidd asks, how likely are Americans to actually form a militia and fight the government even if it overstepped? I don't see much evidence that it's even likely. It feels like a total LARP that would never actually happen. Um, well, yeah, there's two interesting questions, right? There's two questions. One is, what's the chance that the government becomes fascist enough for people to want to fight back? And if that happens, what is the chance they do that? The first question, it's unclear. I mean, I think given enough time, it seems like power likes to consolidate naturally. If you're powerful, you you naturally want more and more of it. So the trajectory of the US government might continue to be more authoritarian as time goes on, as well as governments all over the world, especially when you could easily surveil populations with tech and stuff. Yeah, I don't want to be a pessimist though. Is there potentially an AI solution that maybe AI does governance so well that we don't need people who are inclined to consolidate power, right? Benevolent AI dictatorship is probably the single best form of governance ever, but I guess there's a great risk involved because if the AI becomes no longer benevolent, then what? And how do you get politicians to give up power to AI? That's another question. But it seems naturally power consolidates. You see this on a corporation level, right? Corporations will over time consolidate power. That's why we need anti-monopoly laws. And governments have an incentive to want to be more powerful. What's the chance people actually take up arms against them? I don't know. It seems low, right? It seems pretty low. Like even during COVID lockdowns, well, interestingly, that was under Trump, right? So they kind of gave him a pass in a sense. If if the lockdowns were under a Democrat, would there be more backlash? Almost certainly, but not to the point where people are taking up arms. What would actually need to happen? I don't know. I don't think it's likely. And again, if it does happen, I just don't see it being that effective given the power disparity between government and armed militias. Hubert says even Saddam Hussein was afraid of his subjects. I mean, yeah. Again, that's popular uprising against a dictator is, I think, one of the greatest concerns of a dictator. But we've seen actually this has been less effective in recent times. I think the Arab Spring was some of the last examples of it, but these revolutions that topple governments, or maybe in Nepal, we just had it last week, but like a government that is, and then you could have a military coup, right? That's another way. If there's a coup, okay, the military has more power than the government. They could overtake the government. That could happen. But a strong military and police force, we're seeing more likely than not, certainly in recent times, being able to stop popular uprisings in brutal ways. But yeah, Nepal was crazy. I don't know the full story there, but they just, I guess, see, they had enough people raiding all these different buildings. The ex-president's wife was beaten to death, supposedly. The 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 finance minister was undressed and thrown in a river. That's wild, huh? And what was the reason for it? There was something that triggered it. I don't remember what it was. They weren't happy with some law. Maybe someone can fill me in. Let's see. Lenny's saying what the right to bear arms does is that it creates major deterrence effect on government tyranny because it is not certain of a clean outcome and likely be a messy one. Whether the government is able to eventually crush opposition is a different matter. Just see how the Iraqi insurgents created havoc with the little arms in the U.S. would be 100 times more difficult to crush. Yeah, so I don't know how long you've been tuning in. So that's what I said at the beginning, that it does increase protection against tyranny, but as time goes on, the monopoly of force becomes more and more solidified by the government as the technological gap and power disparity continues to grow. But I do agree with you that just the fact that there's an armed population does, at the very least, make government think twice before doing certain things. Just the fear of a violent uprising. But yeah, if the government wanted to, there's nothing people could do. They would just be messy. Oh, Simiki says it was a social media ban. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Because of a social media ban. That's crazy. Popular uprising because of a social media ban. Istvan, viewing now on Twitch, says, how do I even get Twitch discovery? That's interesting. I get like one Twitch viewer. How does anybody find it? Anyways, good to see you here, our one Twitch viewer. We have a little bit more of a party going on Twitter, Discord, and YouTube. But I guess if that helps the algorithm there, let's get it going. But It's Van says the left has been far more violent than the right for the last decade. I would say about 90% of violence has been left derived. One quick way to check that is do a search of conservatives or independents reporting alt-left rallies, and the opposite ends always. No, it's Van. I'm pretty sure the data conflicts that. We have data on domestic terrorism, and most of it is still coming from the right. So I don't think that's true. And whatever methodology presented, I don't think is more sound than the actual like data. I think it's like FBI data on domestic terrorism. Now, if you want to include like minor things like BLM protests that some turned into riots, and you take every act of violence there, maybe. But if you're talking about murders, like how many people are killed in the name of left-wing politics compared to in the name of right-wing politics, more people for decades now have been killed by right-wing domestic terrorists. Let's see. I bookmarked this thing. Let's find it. Yep, here it is. hold on. I want to share this on Discord as well real quick. There we go. Cool. So we can see, yeah, so look, left-wing murders, right-wing murders. I don't know what happened between 1995 and 2004, but some crazy shit was happening. And even now, the most recent data, 2015 to 2025, again, right-wing murders are 3x that of left-wing murders. So it's just not true. It's just not true. Well, again, so it's saying the FBI definition of domestic terrorism is suspect, considering they refuse to consider Antifa domestic terrorists even while burning buildings, trying to burn cops alive in a precinct in Portland, assaulting people. Would have to see where this data is and charts are coming from. Yeah, you could if you want, I could send it to you. But that was talking about murders, right? So it's possible if you look at low-level violence, like smashing a window, burning something, it's possible with Antifa and the BLM riots, you're going to have a higher, more of that, because there have been more left-wing protests as of late. But if you look at the murder data, right-wing domestic terrorism they're still killing more people, right? So if someone in Antifa murdered somebody, that data would be represented there. All right, I'll do a few more questions and I'm going to wrap it up. I have some work to do and it's getting late. Thoughts on Yitzhak Rabin? I mean, I was pretty young when he was killed, but I appreciated him taking bold moves to try to find a solution, and making necessary concessions that many other leaders have not been willing to make. I know he has a history of a problematic history. He was involved in some terror as well. But again, I think our world is filled with terrorists turned statesmen. So I'm supportive of terrorists if they're willing to change their way and work for peace. I feel the same way about al-Julani in Syria, and I feel the same way about Hamas. That there's a way to incentivize them to change their way. And I already know how triggering this is to some people. How dare you compare Rabin to these other people? But he was involved in some pretty fucked up shit. If you want, I could pull it up. I don't remember off the top of my head, but he's civilians have been killed because of him. Okay. But again, all good. I mean, it's not all good, but what to me is most important is what he attempted to do at the end of his life. And I think that is something that he should be praised for at least the attempt that he paid for this attempt with his life. Had he not been killed, would we have had peace? I mean, there's certainly a better chance we would have had peace than had him not being killed, but it's still not guaranteed. But I appreciate the effort. I definitely appreciate the effort. Lenny's saying, I don't know any left-wing person having to wear a bulletproof vest when they're about to do a public speaking. Yeah, but that's very anecdotal, you know, and situational. Again, the data is more relevant than this. Is there any left-wing comparison? Somebody who was like Charlie Kirk, who would do these giant public rallies or events with controversial views. Like, let's say somebody like Hassan. If somebody like Hassan were to do this, and many, like thousands of people would come out, he might feel inclined to wear a bulletproof vest. Maybe not, but again, that's not how we should measure it. And I think the data on domestic terrorism is pretty clear. Like I don't want to just dismiss it and say the data is clear that there is more murder happening from right-wing domestic terrorism, because there is something happening on the left that you don't really see on the right as much. I'm just trying to think how to really define or explain it. And it's unclear if it's really a feature of the left or if social media just makes it seem more prevalent. But the whole cheering on somebody being killed, again, if Hassan was killed, some number of right wingers would be cheering that on. Would it be a smaller percent? Maybe. Unclear though, you know. I mean, how many people have we seen? Not like, it's different to justify what's happening in Gaza. That's one thing. That's saying, okay, civilians dying is bad, but it's necessary in this situation. That's one category of people. There's certainly no shortage of that. But even take the more extreme, people saying there are no innocents in Gaza, dehumanizing all Palestinians, cheering on the violence. Like, there's no shortage of people who have been doing this as well. And they're primarily on the right. So we do see it very clearly. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream. We also saw this. There was this whole George Floyd challenge where people were reenacting George Floyd. They were having friends like put their boot on their back and uploading that to social media. So the glee when your political opponents or political opposition is killed is not a left-wing thing. What is good is that by and large our institutions condemned it, right? There's no prominent left-wing politician or media, aside from maybe a few rare instances, who showed any support for Kirk being killed, right? It was by and large overwhelming condemnation. Oh, and what's interesting is also you see how unprincipled people are. Also, because again, people are saying, "How dare you cheer on the murder of Kirk?" But they very well may do that if it was somebody they disliked being killed. And the second is how the cancel culture is happening. How they're making lists of people who cheered on Kirk and they're getting them fired. So a lot of the worst features of wokeness, like kind of the cancel culture, the assuming the worst about one's intentions. I'm trying to think if there's other features that are very prevalent on maybe an oversimplistic worldview and blaming it all things on let's say it's Jews or globalists, right? These are things you see prevalent on the right that are prevalent, similar things that we see prevalent in what's described as wokeness. So I don't even know if these are features of wokeness or just features of humans and of some psychological profile. And I was going to say also, we also see this in Jewish activist spaces, right? How broadly anti-Semitism is defined, and how the term anti-Semitism is weaponized to attack people or silence people, how the worst about people is assumed. So we see it in Jewish activist spaces, we see it in racial justice spaces, we see it in trans rights spaces, and we see it also in far right spaces. It's a similar set of features. I should maybe compile a list of these features and see how they are mapped out across the spectrum. That'd be interesting. Also, do we know yet if Kirk was wearing a vest? I didn't see that confirmed. It does seem like the bullet was a ricochet because his shirt kind of had this movement and then went straight to the neck. But somebody showed a photo from behind where you could very clearly see he's not wearing a vest. So I'm not sure that's even been confirmed. But what is interesting is Trump being alive is immensely good luck. The fact that he just turned right at the second for the bullet to not hit him in the face. And Kirk, it seems, had an opposite level of luck, like very bad luck, because it hit him in the chest. And a chest hit very well may have ended his life regardless, but not if he had a plate, not if he had a vest on. But for it to ricochet off his chest and go straight to this artery, I mean, that's just, very bad luck and unfortunate. And that's not, an injury like that is nearly impossible to survive. Even if you obtain an injury like that in the hospital and the doctors are ready to perform on you, even then your chance of surviving is low. Anyways, let's see. We'll do 2 more questions, then we'll just take this to some kind of an after party on Discord. Samiki says right wing is too dishonest at the moment and gravitating towards hate, division, and emotional response to punt it away from that dishonesty. Well, yeah, you do see that. That's true. You do see a lot of prominent right wingers calling for seemingly escalation. We're at war now. And, let's be somewhat sympathetic that they're in a lot of pain and very angry, but you should, you would hope that we should have high standards for those who have influence. So while people are lashing out, we shouldn't accept those who have followings to, like Matt Walsh, his rhetoric, Trump's rhetoric, Elon Musk's rhetoric, all very unacceptable and should be widely condemned for how they're talking about this, stirring up division. But then you have somebody like the governor of Utah. What's his name? He's really rising to the occasion. He's a Republican governor. He's rising to the occasion, calling for de-escalation. And then on the left, you have someone like Bernie Sanders, who put out a very just on-point statement. So these people should be praised. And it's unfortunate that Trump and Musk, 2 of the most powerful people in the world, are leveraging this to just stir up greater division in society. Musk really did go from, within the past few years, from being one of the people I have the most respect for in this world to being one of the people who I dislike the most, who I think is one of the most dangerous public figures today. And his innovation legacy is, I guess we'll see. Time will tell what he succeeds in innovation, but he's in a league of his own in his ability to build and manage multiple companies simultaneously and innovate. But as strong as he is technologically, he's weak with his political commentary and even his social awareness. He's not a good voice for society. He's not making society better. That's unfortunate. Have you seen the film The BB Files? No, I haven't. I haven't seen them. I heard that they're pretty good, though. Okay, I think with that, we'll wrap it. Let's wrap it. Discord crew, you guys want to do chill room? All right, so for those watching on YouTube, we're going to continue the conversation on Discord. Let me drop a link. It's in my bio on Twitter. in the description here on YouTube, and I'm going to also drop one in chat. And to our friend watching this on Twitch, I don't have a link in Twitch, so you're going to need to find your way over. Actually, let's put the link there. We might as well, right? It's funny how this streams to Twitch, but I only log into Twitch like once a year. Oh, I need email confirmation. I'm not doing that now. Anyways, if you want, if our Twitch friend wants to join, you'll need to go to my Twitter or come to YouTube to do it. But anyway, so for those joining Discord for the first time, welcome. On the left-hand side, it says chill room. Click chill room, and then you could connect. You don't need to speak. You don't need to show yourself. You could just listen. But the show goes on. So with that, thank you all for joining. Tomorrow, we're going to do another, not a stream, we're going to do a Twitter space starting at 7 p.m. Jerusalem time. That's noon EST. We're going to do that for around an hour and a half on Twitter. And then we're going to bring it over for Discord for more of a private session, which will happen at around 8:30 p.m. Jerusalem time. And with that, much love from the Western Galilee in the beautiful land of Israel and Palestine. Signing off.